The concert hall was quiet in the early afternoon, the kind of quiet that felt alive with anticipation. Only a few people were there, moving slowly around the polished wooden floors and the towering rows of seats. The stage lights were off, but the room still seemed to glow with the promise of what would come later. In one corner, a janitor moved steadily, his mop swishing gently across the floor. He was not supposed to be noticed, but he hummed softly as he worked, a melody that barely escaped his lips. The janitor was middle-aged, with hands that had clearly worked hard for many years. His clothes were plain and a little worn, and he carried himself with the quiet humility of someone used to being invisible. He did not speak much to anyone and seemed content to go about his tasks alone. Still, there was a calm in his movements, a rhythm in the way he cleaned the hall, as if each sweep of the mop were a beat in an unseen song. From the stage, a voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. It belonged to a famous singer, one of the most celebrated performers in the country. She had arrived early, not because she liked the quiet, but because she liked control. Every detail of her performances had to be perfect, and anyone who dared to disturb that perfection often found themselves facing her wrath. The janitor did not notice her at first. He was focused on a particularly stubborn spot on the floor near the front of the stage, scrubbing it carefully as though it were the most important part of his work. He hummed a tune, soft and steady, and the sound carried lightly through the empty hall. It was a simple melody, but it was clear and pure, with notes that seemed to float in the air. The singer stopped in her tracks, her sharp eyes narrowing. She tilted her head, listening. There was something in the sound that caught her off guard, though she would never admit it aloud. The hum was faint, but it had a richness, a control that seemed unusual for someone who looked so ordinary. She crossed the stage in long, confident strides, her heels clicking against the floor, and stopped just behind the janitor. He did not notice her at first. His focus was absolute, his attention on the floor beneath him. She cleared her throat sharply, and he jumped, startled. For a moment, he stood frozen, mop in hand, unsure if he should apologize or run. But the singer was not here to listen to apologies. She was here to make a scene. "Sing for me," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. There was a mocking smile on her face, the kind that people used when they thought they had the upper hand. "Right now. Let's hear what that hum of yours really sounds like." The janitor blinked. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The request, or rather the command, caught him off guard. He had never sung in front of anyone besides his family, and even that had been rare. The idea of performing on a stage, with the lights and the empty seats that would soon be full, made his stomach tighten. Still, he did not move away. There was something in the singer's tone, a challenge that he could not ignore. He set the mop down carefully, wiped his hands on his pants, and took a small step onto the edge of the stage. His heart was beating fast, but he stood straight, trying to make himself smaller, less visible, even as all eyes, though there were few at the moment, were on him. The singer laughed, a light, cruel sound. She turned to the small group of people she had brought with her, gesturing broadly. "Watch this," she said. "Let's see if a janitor can even hold a note without falling flat." The janitor closed his eyes for a brief moment. He could feel the judgment in the room, the disbelief, the amusement. But he also felt something else, a strange calm that seemed to settle over him. The song he hummed while cleaning was the same song that had lived in his heart for years. He had learned to carry it quietly, to keep it for himself, but it was still there, waiting for a moment like this. He took a deep breath and opened his mouth. The first note was soft, almost shy, but it was steady. It filled the empty hall, and the way it lingered seemed to catch even the singer off guard. She frowned slightly, taking a step back. Her amusement had not expected this. The janitor's voice was controlled, clear, and rich, even at that low volume. There was something about it that commanded attention. Even when it was gentle dot, he continued, each note following the other, simple at first, but precise. The hall seemed to lean in, listening. The floors and walls seemed to hum with the sound, as if they too recognized the music. For a few moments, it was just him and the melody, a quiet force that could not be ignored. The singer's smirk began to falter, replaced by a thin line of disbelief. The janitor's voice did not waver, though he could feel the eyes on him, could feel the tension in the air. He had sung in private for years, and the technique, the control, the emotion, it all came naturally. He was not trying to prove anything. He was simply giving life to the song he had carried silently for so long. The singer shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. She had seen talent before, but not like this. The power of the voice did not come from theatrics or fame. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere honest. She could feel it, and it unsettled her more than any criticism ever could. For the janitor, it was just the beginning. He had many more notes in his chest, melodies that had been locked away, but he kept them restrained for now, letting the first few notes settle, letting the hall and the singer understand that this was not ordinary. He moved with the song, allowing himself to feel the music as it flowed, and in that moment he was not a janitor. He was a singer, a man who had spent a lifetime learning to be unseen, now seen not by choice but by circumstance. The singer's entourage exchanged nervous glances. They were not used to seeing someone take control of a room without fame, without stage presence, without any of the usual trappings. It was the purity of the voice, the undeniable skill that demanded their attention. Even the few staff members in the hall felt a strange pull, an awareness that something extraordinary was happening. The janitor sang on, unaware of the ripples he was creating. Each note was precise, each breath measured, each tone carrying emotion. The simplicity of it made it even more powerful. He did not embellish or try to impress. He simply sang what he knew, what he had learned to perfect in solitude. The contrast between the expectation of failure and the reality of brilliance began to make the singer uneasy. Finally, he reached the end of the first phrase. He lowered his head slightly, not out of shame, but out of habit. He had finished, at least for now, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. The singer looked at him, her eyes narrowing, trying to process what she had just heard. The laughter that she had expected was gone, replaced by silence and something like disbelief. For the janitor, it was just another day. He would return to his mop and his work soon enough. But for everyone else, something had shifted. The quiet man they had overlooked had revealed a power they had not anticipated. In that moment, the lines between the ordinary and the extraordinary blurred. And the first part of the story had already begun to change the way people saw him. The singer stepped back, masking her reaction, but her pride had taken a hit. She had mocked him, expecting nothing, and yet here he stood, commanding attention in a way she had never imagined. She clenched her hands slightly, trying to regain her composure, knowing that the next steps could not be taken lightly. The janitor's humble beginning on the stage had set the stage for something much larger, and both of them were only just beginning to understand it. The hall seemed different now. The soft sunlight that spilled through the high windows fell across the polished floors in a way that made everything look sharper, more vivid. The janitor stood still for a moment, letting the echoes of his first notes fade, his chest rising and falling slowly. The singer was no longer amused, and a tension filled the room, thick enough to feel underfoot. The few staff members who remained shifted nervously, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The singer, who had been so confident moments ago, stepped closer, her eyes still fixed on him. She had expected a laugh, a quick embarrassment, but there was none. Instead, The janitor's voice had shown control, precision, and something more, a quiet strength that came from a lifetime of practice hidden away from the world. Her smile had disappeared, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. She whispered to one of her assistants, who only shook their head, equally stunned. Without another word, she motioned him to continue. The janitor hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsure if he should stop or go on. Then, as if the music inside him demanded release, he began again. This time, his voice carried more. It moved across the room in steady, unwavering waves. It was not loud, but it was clear, every note placed exactly where it belonged. Even the dust seemed to pause in the air as he sang. The singer's entourage exchanged glances that were almost comical. They had come to watch someone fail, to share in a moment of superiority, but now they were witnessing something entirely different. Their eyes followed each note, drawn in by the purity of the sound. They whispered to one another, careful not to interrupt the flow of the song, yet unable to contain their amazement. The janitor's hands rested lightly at his sides. He moved no more than necessary, letting his voice carry the story of a song that was much older than him. Each note seemed to tell a secret, a memory he had carried silently for years. There was pain in some phrases, joy in others, and the subtle emotion behind each tone revealed the depth of a man who had seen much and endured more. It was impossible to look at him and not feel the story he was telling, even without understanding the words fully. The singer shifted uncomfortably. Her mind was racing. She had always prided herself on her ability to command the stage, to dominate a performance with charisma and skill. She had trained her voice, yes, but she had never heard anything like this. This simple, humble man, with no glamour, no fame, no expectations beyond doing his work, had a voice that could challenge her own. She clenched her fists for a moment, trying to remember the control she usually held, but it felt like trying to catch water in her hands. The janitor's voice began to climb higher, moving into ranges that most untrained singers could only dream of. There was no strain, no effort, only smooth transitions from note to note. He had sung like this for years, alone in empty rooms, practicing until each pitch felt like it belonged to him. He did not seek attention, but now it was drawn to him naturally. The audience, small as it was, had no choice but to be captivated. Some of the singer's assistants were frozen in place. They had heard great singers before, but this was different. It was not about power or projection. It was about purity, clarity, and honesty. Every note resonated with a sense of truth, a rawness that could not be manufactured or faked. Even the light from the stage seemed to bend around the sound, softening, highlighting, almost acknowledging the skill behind it. The singer's lips parted slightly, a flicker of envy crossing her features. She had been mocking him, intending to show the world how ridiculous it was to ask a janitor to sing, but that illusion had crumbled in an instant. Now she had to face the reality that she had underestimated someone who had spent a lifetime preparing quietly, unseen and unrecognized. Pride and humility clashed inside her, a storm she had never expected. The janitor did not notice her struggle. He was lost in the song, in the movement of the melody, the rise and fall of each phrase. He remembered his own life as he sang, the long days of work, the sacrifices, the nights spent learning in silence. Music had been his companion, his comfort, his secret world. And now, for a fleeting moment, that world touched others. It was not about proving himself. It was about letting the music exist fully, freely. The first phrase ended, and the room was silent again. Not a sound, not a breath, only the echo lingering in the corners. The singer's eyes narrowed, trying to gauge what had just happened. There was a tension in the air that made her pulse quicken, a strange mix of anger, surprise, and respect she had not anticipated. She took a step closer, But she did not interrupt. She had learned something important in these few minutes. Control was not always about dominance. The janitor paused, taking a slow, measured breath. He had more to give, more notes to release, more emotion to carry. The song had barely begun, and yet the room felt changed. Even the few maintenance staff who remained were leaning slightly forward, unable to look away. They had passed him every day, seeing only the uniform and the mop, never imagining the depth behind the quiet eyes and careful movements. The singer took a deep breath, trying to recover. She had rehearsed countless shows, performed in front of thousands, yet she had never felt this kind of vulnerability. She was used to being the one to control the story, to manipulate the energy in a room. But this was different. This was not about manipulation. It was about truth, the kind that demanded attention, whether one liked it or not. The janitor moved into a higher note, smooth and unwavering. The sound filled the corners of the hall, bouncing off the walls and the ceiling, wrapping around every empty seat. It was not loud, but it carried a presence that made the singer step back instinctively. Her amusement had vanished completely, replaced by a tight tension she could not release. Dot as he sang. The janitor's hands moved slightly, unconsciously emphasizing certain phrases. There was no flourish, no drama, only subtle gestures that seemed natural and unforced. The room felt alive with the honesty of his performance. Time slowed, and every heartbeat seemed to sync with the rhythm of the melody. The singer's expression shifted from disbelief to something else, a grudging acknowledgement of skill she could not ignore. She realized she had been wrong to underestimate him, and that realization was sharp and uncomfortable. The thought of having mocked him, of standing above him with condescension, made her feel strangely vulnerable. She was used to admiration, but not humility forced upon her by someone she had considered beneath notice. The janitor's voice reached a gentle climax. The notes soft but full, carrying emotion that could not be contained. There was sadness, longing, and a quiet joy all in one. It was a complex mixture, yet delivered with a simplicity that made it accessible, understandable, and deeply moving. It was as though the hall itself listened, held its breath, and waited for the final note to fall. When the phrase ended, the hall was quiet for several heartbeats. The singer opened her mouth, perhaps to speak, to regain some sense of control, but no words came. She could only watch, helpless, as the janitor stood there, humble and composed, having shared something profoundly beautiful without arrogance, without intention to impress, only to express. For the janitor, it was just a moment in his day. He would return to cleaning, to the quiet work that had defined him for so long. But for everyone else in the hall, it was a moment that would linger. The small audience, the singer, the staff, they had all seen something extraordinary. A man who had been invisible had revealed a talent that could not be ignored. And in doing so, he had shifted the balance of the room, the expectations of the people present, and perhaps the future of a performance that had just begun. The janitor took a deep breath, feeling the familiar warmth of the melody in his chest. He knew what he could do, what his voice was capable of, and he also knew that the hall was no longer empty of judgment. The few people present held their attention tightly, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear the next note. He had started softly, but now he was ready to let the music show its full strength. The first high note came, clear and precise, without effort. It was the kind of sound that could make anyone stop and listen. The singer, standing just a few feet away, froze. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes widened. She had always thought herself an expert at controlling a stage, at holding attention with her talent, but she had never heard anything like this. The sound was effortless, yet perfect, a combination that was rare, even among the most trained professionals. He moved to another note, then another, climbing higher and higher. Each one was more controlled than the last, each one cleaner, and each one delivered with emotion that cut through the air. It was not just skill. It was something more. It was the feeling of a life lived quietly but passionately, of years spent learning and practicing in secret. There was no arrogance, no need to prove anything. The music itself was enough that the singer could feel her own voice tightening in her throat. She had demanded this performance to mock him, to make him feel small, but now she was struggling with her own feelings. She had never faced anyone like this. Every note the janitor hit carried a story, a depth of understanding and pain and joy that made her realize she had underestimated him entirely. She had expected failure, and instead she found brilliance. The janitor's body moved subtly with the melody. His hands shifted slightly, almost unconsciously, guiding the sound as it traveled through the hall. He was not performing for applause, and he did not need to. The song had become part of him, and he had become part of the song. It was a natural, effortless flow, one that could not be faked or forced. Each note resonated in the empty seats, wrapping around the audience, even if that audience was small. The singer's assistants were watching in astonishment. They had seen many performers, but the janitor's presence, his humility combined with this incredible skill, created something they could not have anticipated. Some whispered softly to each other, careful not to disturb the flow of the performance. Their eyes kept flicking between the singer and the janitor, wondering how someone so ordinary in appearance could produce something so extraordinary. The janitor moved to the highest note of the song. He did not strain, did not fight against the limits of his voice. Instead, it flowed naturally, a pure and powerful sound that seemed to hang in the air. The singer could not move her gaze. Her confidence, built over years of training and experience, wavered. She realized she had been cruel, using her position and fame to belittle someone she assumed was nothing. And now, the truth was undeniable. Each note the janitor sang seemed to touch something inside the singer. She felt a strange mix of emotions, awe, envy, and a deep respect she could not yet put into words. The audience, even if it was just a few staff members, felt it too. The room seemed to pulse with the sound, the vibrations carrying the honesty of the performance. It was not flashy or showy. It was raw, real, and impossible to ignore. As the song continued, the janitor allowed himself to smile slightly, not out of pride, but because he felt the music was being heard as it was meant to be. He had carried this song with him for years, practicing quietly while the world moved on. Now, for a fleeting moment, it was alive outside of him, touching others, commanding attention in a way he had never sought, but now appreciated. The singer stepped back, unsure how to respond. She had always believed that talent was something that could be measured, that fame and training could guarantee superiority. Yet here was a man with none of the glitz, none of the expectation, singing notes she herself had never dared to reach in a live performance. The thought unsettled her, challenged her sense of control, and forced her to confront something she had long ignored. True skill and passion could exist anywhere, even in the quietest corners of the world. The janitor moved smoothly into a series of rapid notes, each one perfectly in tune, each one carrying emotion and clarity. He had never performed for anyone outside of his private life, but he had trained meticulously. The years of solitude and dedication showed in every tone. The room seemed to vibrate with his voice, and for a moment it was impossible to focus on anything else. The singer's usual dominance of attention had evaporated, replaced by an undeniable recognition of his talent. There was a subtle change in the atmosphere. The staff who had come to witness a humiliating moment now stood silently, watching, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had known the janitor for years, seeing him as part of the background, part of the machinery of the hall, and yet now he was commanding their attention in a way that left them speechless. The contrast between his ordinary appearance and extraordinary skill made the moment even more powerful. The singer swallowed hard, struggling with a mixture of pride and shame. She had underestimated him, and in doing so, she had exposed her own vulnerabilities. She had assumed control would be easy, but control was irrelevant in the face of raw, undeniable talent. She could no longer dismiss him, no longer claim superiority simply because of her fame. The janitor had proven something deeper, something that could not be taught or bought. As the song reached its final notes, the janitor's voice softened, carrying a gentle warmth that lingered in the hall. It was not a dramatic finish, not a show of force. It was a quiet, powerful ending that spoke of mastery, discipline, and the joy of music itself. The singer stood frozen, her usual composure slipping, replaced by an unsteady admiration she did not know how to express. For the janitor, the performance was an expression of years of dedication, a moment of honesty shared with the world. He did not seek applause, did not crave recognition. He simply let the music exist fully, as it had always been inside him. And in doing so, he had changed the room, shifted perceptions, and left an impression that would linger long after the notes faded. When the final note hung in the air, the silence was profound. It was a silence filled with the weight of what had just occurred. The singer's expression softened, a quiet acknowledgment passing across her face. She had been wrong to assume, wrong to mock, and wrong to underestimate. The janitor, a quiet man who had walked unnoticed through life, had revealed a truth she could not ignore. Talent, dedication, and passion could not be measured by appearances or expectations. The janitor lowered his head slightly, not out of fear or shame, but out of habit. The performance had ended, but its impact would not fade. The hall, the people present, and even the singer herself had witnessed something rare and remarkable. It was not about fame or applause or superiority. It was about the simple, undeniable power of a voice that carried years of unseen work and quiet perseverance. The first part of the surprise had ended, but the story and the revelation of his true skill was far from over. The final notes of the song faded slowly, leaving a silence that felt almost sacred. The janitor stood there, shoulders relaxed, but heart still pounding with the familiar thrill of music. He had given a performance he had only ever imagined in private, and now it existed in front of others, real and undeniable. The room was still quiet, as though everyone present needed a moment to process what had happened. The singer looked at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. She had expected to see embarrassment, but instead she had seen mastery. She had intended to mock, to expose inadequacy, yet what she had witnessed was far beyond what she had ever imagined. For the first time, she was forced to confront a reality she had not prepared for. A man she had assumed to be ordinary possessed a talent she could barely comprehend. The janitor took a step back from the edge of the stage, lowering his head slightly out of habit. He had never performed for anyone outside of family or close friends, and public attention made him uneasy, even now. Yet he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had shared a part of himself that had long been kept hidden, a skill honed over years in solitude, and it had reached those who were listening. That was enough. Finally, one of the singer's assistants broke the silence. They asked in a hushed voice, careful not to disturb the fragile atmosphere where he had learned to sing. The janitor hesitated, unsure if he should speak. Singing had been his private world, a sanctuary he had never shared with the public. But now, looking at the curious faces around him, he felt a small push to explain. He began to speak softly, his voice steady but low. He told them that years ago, he had trained as a classical vocalist. It was a time when his life had allowed him to focus entirely on music, to immerse himself in lessons and practice. He had learned discipline, breath control, and the subtle ways of moving a melody with emotion. Singing had once been a dream, perhaps a path to something more, but life had changed his direction. The singer and the staff listened intently. There was no boastfulness in his voice, no desire to impress. He simply spoke the truth, recounting the path that had led him to this moment. Life had forced him to put aside his ambitions. Responsibilities had come, sacrifices had been made, and music had become something private, a companion rather than a career. Yet even in the quiet, he had never stopped learning, never stopped striving to perfect his skill. He explained that his family had needed him, that illness and financial struggles had changed the course of his life. Music had remained a part of him, a steady thread that he carried through years of work and duty. It had been a gift, a solace, a way to endure hardships without losing himself completely. The audience could sense the sincerity in his words, the connection between his past and the melody they had just heard. The singer's face softened, a mixture of regret and admiration crossing her features. She had mocked him, but she could see now that her assumptions had been wrong. Talent was not always obvious. It could be hidden, quiet, and still so profound. She felt a new understanding form inside her, one that was difficult to articulate. Pride, she realized, could blind a person to the truth. She had been blinded. For the janitor, there was no anger, no desire to shame anyone. He did not hold the past against the singer or her entourage. He simply shared his story to provide context, to show that the voice they had just heard was the result of years of dedication and quiet persistence. The honesty in his words matched the honesty in his singing, and that made the moment even more powerful. The room seemed to breathe differently now, as though the revelation had shifted its energy. The singer took a step closer, her tone softer, almost hesitant. She asked him how he had managed to keep his skill alive while living a life so different from his dream. He smiled slightly, a small, humble smile, and explained that practice had been his constant companion. In the quiet hours, when no one was watching, he had trained, studied, and sung. It had been a part of him, something that could not be taken away by circumstance. His story resonated with everyone present. The assistants, who had expected a simple spectacle, now understood the depth behind the music. They could see the connection between his life and the melody, how each note had carried years of experience, sacrifice, and emotion. It was a lesson in humility and respect, a reminder that greatness often hides in the most unlikely places. The singer, still standing close, felt a shift inside her. Her earlier amusement and superiority were replaced by a newfound respect. She realized that true talent did not always seek recognition. It existed quietly, waiting for the right moment, and when it emerged, it had the power to change perceptions instantly. She had underestimated the janitor, but she could no longer do so. She had been humbled not by ridicule, but by skill, discipline, and dedication. The janitor's voice and story created a ripple effect. The staff who had worked alongside him for years now saw him in a different light. They had always respected him, but now they understood the depth of his abilities and the resilience behind his calm demeanor. It was as if the room itself had shifted, the air charged with recognition of something extraordinary, quietly living among them. The singer finally found words, her voice careful and sincere. She acknowledged her mistake and apologized for her earlier behavior. She admitted that she had judged too quickly, assuming that appearances dictated talent. Her voice was calm, without the usual sharpness, and the janitor nodded slightly, accepting the apology without need for further explanation. There was no bitterness, only understanding and a mutual recognition of talent and integrity. For a long moment, the hall was silent again. The janitor looked around, meeting the eyes of those present, and for the first time in years, he felt seen. Not just noticed, but truly recognized for what he had built, maintained, and perfected through years of quiet dedication. The singer, the assistants, and even the few remaining staff members understood that the man they had overlooked held a rare and extraordinary gift. The janitor took a step back from the stage, signaling that his story and performance were complete for now. He would return to his work, to the quiet cleaning and care he performed each day, but something had changed. The singer had learned a lesson. The staff had witnessed greatness, and he had reminded everyone that talent could exist in the most unassuming forms. It was a moment of revelation, humility, and respect that none of them would forget. The singer, for her part, made a quiet promise to herself. She would never underestimate someone again, and she would carry the memory of the janitor's voice and story with her. The experience had shifted her perspective, teaching her that skill, dedication, and passion were more valuable than appearance, status, or assumption. It was a lesson she would not forget. As the janitor returned to his mop and his work, the room slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Yet the impact of what had occurred lingered. The melody, the story, and the revelation of hidden talent left a lasting impression. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something rare, a quiet man sharing a part of his soul, proving that greatness often lives where no one expects it, and that respect must be earned through dedication and honesty, not assumed through position or fame. The janitor returned to his work quietly, moving through the hall with the same steady rhythm he always had. Yet something had changed. The air felt different, charged with recognition and respect. Even the empty seats seemed to hum with the memory of his voice. He went about his duties as if nothing had happened, but inside there was a quiet pride, the kind that comes from living truthfully and finally being seen for who you are. The singer stood on the stage, her eyes following him as he worked. She had watched the humility in his movements, the skill in his performance, and the honesty in his story. She realized that talent, discipline, and integrity were intertwined in a way that could not be faked or purchased. She had thought she could control the situation, dominate the performance, and assert her superiority. Instead, she had learned that greatness often lies hidden in unexpected places, and that humility can carry as much power as skill. She took a deep breath and approached him, keeping her voice calm and respectful. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I underestimated you, and I was wrong. Your talent is extraordinary, and I should have recognized it from the beginning." The janitor paused for a moment, then nodded, accepting her words without need for further explanation. There was no bitterness, only acknowledgement, mutual understanding, and respect. The few staff members in the room had begun to move closer, their eyes wide with admiration. They had witnessed something rare and extraordinary. The janitor, who had been invisible to them for so long, had revealed a skill that could not be ignored. His quiet dedication, his years of practice, and his ability to express emotion through music had transformed the way they saw him. It was a lesson in humility and respect, a reminder that true greatness does not always seek attention, but can shine brilliantly when the moment arises. The singer made a suggestion, her voice tentative yet sincere. "Would you consider performing with me? Just once, as a duet? I think the world should hear what you can do." The janitor shook his head gently, a small smile crossing his face. "Thank you, but I am content. Music has always been my companion, my way of expressing myself quietly. I do not need fame or recognition." This was enough. His words carried a wisdom that was as compelling as his voice had been. He did not seek reward or acknowledgement beyond the simple joy of sharing his gift. The singer nodded, understanding. She felt a new sense of humility and respect, not only for the janitor, but for the lessons he had imparted without intending to. She realized that her own success and fame did not define the value of talent, and that she had much to learn about patience, humility, and the hidden depths of people she had overlooked. as the janitor continued his work. The staff members returned to their duties. Their perception of him forever changed. They no longer saw him as just a janitor. They saw a man who had lived with dedication, discipline, and a quiet passion that had finally found its moment in the light. It was a reminder that respect must be earned through consistent effort and integrity, not assumed through position or status. The singer watched him for a few moments longer, then turned back to the stage, reflecting on the experience. She had been humbled, reminded that arrogance and judgment can blind even the most talented. The janitor's performance and story had left a lasting impression, one that she would carry with her in every future performance and interaction. It was a lesson in empathy, recognition, and the true nature of talent. The janitor finished his rounds, wiping the last spot on the floor with meticulous care. He took a step back, surveying the hall, and allowed himself a quiet, satisfied sigh. He had shared a part of himself with the world, and it had been received with honesty and respect. That was more than enough. He did not need applause, accolades, or fame. The experience had been validating in a way that mattered most. He had stayed true to himself, and others had recognized it. The singer approached one final time, her voice soft but sincere. "I hope one day you might consider sharing your gift with more people. The world deserves to hear what you can do." The janitor smiled again, grateful for the sentiment, but content in his choice. "Perhaps one day, but for now, this is where I belong. Music is a part of me, and that is enough." There was a quiet finality in his words, a calm that came from years of living a life of honesty and dedication. The room seemed to settle into a peaceful rhythm. The singer returned to her preparations, the staff resumed their tasks, and the janitor continued his work, each movement purposeful and steady. The hall, now touched by the resonance of extraordinary talent and quiet humility, seemed to hum softly with memory. It was a space transformed not by grandeur or spectacle, but by authenticity and dedication. As the day progressed, the memory of the janitor's performance lingered in the minds of all present. They spoke quietly among themselves, acknowledging the depth and skill they had witnessed. It was a reminder that greatness often goes unnoticed, and that true talent is revealed through patience, practice, and a willingness to remain humble. The experience left a lasting mark, shaping the way they would perceive the world and those around them. The singer, returning to her routine, felt a subtle shift in her approach to her craft. She carried the memory of the janitor's performance with her, a quiet inspiration that reminded her that humility and recognition of hidden talent were as important as her own skill. She had learned that life could surprise her, that true artistry often exists beyond the stage, and that respect is earned through dedication, not assumed through fame. The janitor, finishing his last tasks, walked slowly toward the exit. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the hall that had held his voice and story. There was no prideful flourish, no desire for recognition. He simply acknowledged the space, a silent gratitude for the moment and the understanding that had been shared. The experience had been meaningful, a rare convergence of effort, opportunity, and recognition. As he stepped outside into the fresh air, the day felt brighter, lighter. He continued on his way, returning to the life he had chosen, grounded in simplicity and purpose. Music would remain his companion, his voice a private testament to years of discipline, passion, and quiet perseverance. The world had glimpsed a part of him, and he had accepted that without need for validation. It was a life of integrity and fulfillment, carried with calm and grace. The singer remained behind, reflecting on the lessons of the day. She had witnessed humility and talent intertwine in a way that was unforgettable. She understood that admiration and respect were more powerful than mockery or dominance, and that true skill often lay hidden in unexpected places. Her perspective on fame, talent, and human connection had been forever altered by a quiet janitor who sang from the heart. The hall slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the ordinary sounds of preparation and cleaning filling the space once more. Yet the memory of the janitor's performance lingered, a quiet echo of dedication and talent that would not fade. It was a reminder that greatness is not always visible, that true artistry exists in those who persevere quietly, and that respect and recognition are earned through honesty, skill, and commitment. The janitor's story, his voice, and his humility would stay with everyone who had witnessed it. It was a testament to the power of quiet dedication and the unexpected moments that reveal true talent. The singer, the staff, and even the empty hall carried the experience forward, transformed by a simple truth. Greatness often lives where no one expects it, and respect is earned not through status, but through perseverance, authenticity, and the courage to remain true to oneself.